The crane operator saw it first. He was running the tower crane on the east side of the Callaway Tower project, 42 floors of glass and steel going up in the middle of downtown, the most expensive private development the city had seen in a decade, when the sixth-floor forming deck shifted. Not dramatically, not the kind of movement that made men run, just a slow, almost imperceptible lean toward the south face of the structure, the kind of thing you noticed in your peripheral vision and then told yourself you hadn't seen. He radioed it in at 7:14 in the morning. By 7:22, Victoria Callaway was on site. She arrived the way she arrived everywhere, 2 cars ahead of schedule, already on a call, her site manager Frank pulling open the door of the SUV before it had fully stopped. She was 47, dark-haired, the founder and sole executive of Callaway Development Group, which had put up 14 buildings in 8 years and had never once gone over budget or under deadline. The industry press described her in the language usually reserved for weather events. She had learned to accept this as a compliment. She was also, at this particular moment, 11 days from the ceremonial opening of the most important project of her career, and the 6th floor of that project had just moved in a direction it was not supposed to move. "Talk to me," she said to Frank before her second foot hit the ground. Frank talked. Victoria walked. The construction site swallowed her, the noise of it, the diesel and concrete dust smell, the organized chaos of 400 workers moving through their morning. She listened to Frank's assessment of the deck shift with the focused, consumptive attention she gave to all problems, extracting what was useful, discarding what wasn't, building a picture in real time. None of the picture was good. At the base of the 6th floor forming deck, a man in a worn canvas jacket was already looking up. He had been looking up since 7:09. If the kind of story where the person nobody notices turns out to be the one who understands the most is the kind that stays with you, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Marcus Carter had worked this site for 6 weeks. He was part of the general labor crew, the category of worker that large construction projects required in large numbers and thought about almost never. He arrived at 6:30 each morning before most of the skilled trades and left after most of them had gone. He did what was asked of him without complaint and without conversation, and in 6 weeks, no one on the site had learned anything about him beyond his first name and the fact that he always brought his own coffee in a battered steel thermos. He was broad-shouldered and somewhere in his mid-40s, with close-cropped hair and hands that were calloused in the specific way of someone who had done physical work for years, but had done other things before that. He wore plain clothes, canvas jacket, worn work pants, steel-toed boots that had been resoled twice. He owned nothing on that site that announced anything about him. Every morning before the crew arrived, he walked the perimeter of the building the same way, not quickly, not with the distraction of someone killing time. He walked it the way a person walked something they were reading, his eyes moving in careful sections from the ground up, pausing at intervals, resuming. His co-workers had noticed this and decided it was a habit, the kind of thing men developed when they had spent too many years doing dangerous work and couldn't fully turn off the part of their brain that was always looking for what didn't fit. They were right, though not in the way they meant. In the front pocket of his jacket, Marcus carried a folded piece of paper. He never took it out on site. He never showed it to anyone. It was a drawing Lily had made on a Saturday morning 3 weeks ago, a building with windows that looked like eyes and a sun above it that was considerably larger than the building, the way suns always were in children's drawings. She had written "Daddy's work" at the bottom in careful, crooked letters. He checked that it was still there each morning before he clocked in. Lily was 7 years old. She had her mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking, and her father's stubbornness about most everything else. She was currently in a second-grade classroom 4 miles from this construction site, probably at this moment engaged in the focused, total commitment coloring that she brought to all artistic endeavors. And she had no idea that her father had been looking at this building with a particular quality of attention for 6 weeks, because he had a particular reason to. Marcus had designed it. Not under his name, not anymore. The original commission had come to Carter Structural Group 8 years ago, when Marcus was still running the firm he'd built from a two-person consultancy into one of the most respected structural engineering practices in the region. He had designed the Callaway Tower from the foundation up, the load distribution, the curtain wall system, the forming deck sequence on the upper floors. And then, 4 years later, when Dana died and the company dissolved in the quiet way that things dissolved when the person holding them together was gone, the project had passed through 2 successor firms before landing with the contractors currently building it. The blueprints still had his name on them, buried in the revision history, in a font size that no one on a construction site ever read. He had not planned to end up working this site. He had taken the labor job because Lily needed to eat, and the consulting work had dried up in the years after he stopped returning calls, and one of the crew leads had needed bodies without asking too many questions. He had shown up the first morning without any intention of looking at anything beyond what he was paid to look at. But the building was there, and he could not look at it the way other people looked at it, as a structure going up, as a construction project, as 42 floors of glass and steel. He looked at it the way you looked at something you had made, the way you looked at a drawing on a piece of paper that had since become a thing in the world. And he looked at it with the specific and unshared knowledge of someone who knew where every load path ran and what every connection was designed to carry. He had noticed the deck formwork problem on day 3. It was not visible to anyone who hadn't designed the sequence. The forming deck on the 6th floor was carrying a lateral load that the original spec had distributed differently. A change made somewhere in the succession of firms, probably a cost adjustment, probably approved by someone who understood the numbers but not the building. The change was within tolerance technically. It would pass any inspection. It would also, under the specific conditions of the next week, a concrete pour scheduled for floor 7, the lateral wind loads projected for the coming weather system, the settlement pattern Marcus had been quietly tracking in the south foundation wall, caused the 6th floor deck to fail. Not catastrophically, not immediately, but it would fail. He had put in a written concern to the site foreman on day 5. The foreman had thanked him and filed it somewhere. He had raised it verbally twice more in the weeks since, to the foreman and once to Frank, and each time had received the particular response that men like him received when they said things that didn't fit the category they'd been assigned to. The careful, patient, professionally courteous dismissal of someone who was certain they were talking to the wrong kind of person. He had not pushed. He had not explained himself. He had continued watching and continued calculating and continued carrying Lily's drawing in his jacket pocket, and he had told himself that he was probably wrong, that the engineers of record had looked at this, that there were systems in place for exactly this kind of thing. He had told himself this for 6 weeks. And then the crane operator radioed in at 7:14, and Marcus looked up at the 6th floor deck, and he understood that he was not wrong, and that the systems had not caught it, and that in approximately 4 hours, when the scheduled concrete pour for floor 7 began adding load to a structure already at the edge of its tolerance, something was going to go wrong in the middle of 400 people. He was already walking toward the site office when Victoria Callaway's SUV pulled through the gate. She saw him the way she saw all site laborers, as part of the background, the human infrastructure of the project, present and necessary in the aggregate and essentially invisible in the particular. She was moving fast, Frank beside her, her attention on the 6th floor and on the structural engineer she was already trying to reach on her phone. Marcus stepped into a path, not aggressively, not with the energy of a man trying to cause a scene. He simply stopped walking where he was, which happened to be directly between Victoria Callaway and the building she was walking toward, and he said, "Miss Callaway, I need 2 minutes." Victoria's stride broke. She looked at him, a man in a canvas jacket and work pants, a steel thermos in one hand, standing in the middle of her construction site at 7:23 in the morning with the specific and unusual quality of someone who was not nervous about stopping her. "Sir," Frank said, already moving to redirect him, "Miss Callaway has an urgent situation." "I know," Marcus said. He kept his eyes on Victoria. "That's what I need to talk to her about." Victoria looked at him for a moment. She had built a career on the ability to read rooms and read people, and what she was reading from this man was not desperation and not opportunism. He was not agitated. His hands were steady. His voice had the flat, even quality of someone reporting a fact rather than seeking attention. She looked at Frank. Frank's expression said, "We don't have time for this." She looked back at Marcus. 60 seconds, she said. Go. He went. He told her about the 6th floor deck. He told her about the lateral load redistribution, about the foundation settlement on the south wall, about the projected wind loading in the weather system currently sitting 200 miles west of the city. He told her the concrete pour scheduled for floor 7 needed to stop, and the 6th floor needed to be reshored before any additional load was added to it. He told her all of this in 58 seconds, in the precise, sequential language of someone who had spent 20 years describing structural problems to people who needed to understand them quickly. When he finished, Victoria looked at him. "What's your name?" she said. "Marcus Carter. I'm on the general labor crew." Something moved through her expression, not dismissal, but the particular recalibration of someone who has received information from an unexpected source and hasn't yet decided what to do with it. "Frank," she said, without looking away from Marcus, "get Rodriguez on the phone." Rodriguez was the structural engineer of record. "Tell him I need him on site in the next 30 minutes. Frank made the call. Victoria looked at Marcus for another moment with the careful, measuring attention of a woman who had learned to be very precise about what she trusted and why. "Stay where I can find you," she said. Marcus nodded and stepped aside. She walked past him, and he watched her go, and then he found a position near the south face of the building where he could see the 6th floor deck and the foundation wall simultaneously. And he stood there with his thermos and waited to see what happened next. Rodriguez arrived in 22 minutes. He was a compact man in his early 50s, with the confident bearing of someone whose credentials had never been seriously questioned. And he walked the 6th floor with Frank and 2 of his own junior engineers, while Victoria stood below and watched. The assessment took 40 minutes. Marcus watched it from the ground, tracking the positions of the engineers, noting where they paused and where they didn't. He could not hear what they were saying. He didn't need to. When Rodriguez came back down, his expression had changed. He spoke to Victoria in the lowered voice of a professional delivering news he would have preferred not to deliver. Marcus was 30 feet away and caught none of the words, but he watched Victoria's face, and what he saw there told him enough. The pour was stopped. The shoring crew was called in. The site went into a controlled pause that cost, by Marcus's rough estimate, somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 in delays and labor. Frank came to find him 40 minutes later. "Ms. Calloway wants to see you," Frank said. His tone had changed. He was not looking at Marcus the way he had looked at him that morning. She was standing at the mobile site office trailer when Marcus arrived, her phone in her hand, her expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has just reorganized their understanding of a situation and is standing inside the new version of it. She looked at him directly. "Rodriguez confirmed the deck was at risk," she said. "He said the load redistribution from the revision in 2021 created a vulnerability that his team hadn't flagged for this pour sequence." She paused. "He also said the analysis you described would have required detailed knowledge of the original structural design documents." Marcus said nothing. "General laborers don't have access to those documents," Victoria said. It was not quite a question. "No," Marcus said. "They don't." She looked at him steadily. The site noise continued around them, the distant percussion of a project in modified operation. But here at the trailer, there was a quiet that both of them were inside. "Who are you?" Victoria asked. Not in the tone she had used that morning, the brisk efficiency of someone allocating 60 seconds. She said it the way you asked when you genuinely wanted to know. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and felt the folded drawing without taking it out, the small habitual check he performed without thinking. Then he said, "I designed this building." The silence that followed had a particular quality to it. Victoria's expression moved through several things. The controlled professional surface held, but underneath it something was shifting. The specific reorganization of a person discovering that the ground they have been standing on was different from what they believed it to be. "Carter Structural," she said. She said it slowly, as though the name was arriving from a distance. "Yes." "The original commission." Her eyes went to the building, to the 6th floor, back to Marcus. That was 8 years ago. The firm dissolved." 4 years ago," Marcus said. "Yes." Victoria absorbed this. She looked at the building again, at the 42 floors of glass and steel that were all standing because of the specific and unrecognized knowledge of the man in front of her who had spent 6 weeks on her labor crew trying to tell someone what he knew. "You put in a written concern," she said. 5 weeks ago. Frank showed me the log." 6 weeks ago," Marcus said, "and twice verbally after that." Victoria did not look away from him. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in the specific expression of someone sitting with something they cannot argue against and are not trying to. "Why didn't you tell someone who you were?" she asked. Marcus considered this for a moment. He thought about what to say and how much of it was true, and how to say the true part without making it into more than it was. "I tried to tell people what I knew," he said. "Who I was didn't seem like it should matter." Victoria was quiet. Around them, the site continued its modified morning. 400 workers redistributed into their adjusted assignments. The crisis contained, the building standing. "It shouldn't," she said. "You're right." She said it the way people said things they meant without performance. The flat, honest acknowledgement of someone who has stopped defending a position they can no longer hold. "It shouldn't matter. And I built a company where it did. Where the man who designed this building couldn't get anyone to listen to him because of how he showed up." Marcus did not say anything. "How close were we?" Victoria asked. "This morning, if the pour had gone ahead." Marcus looked at the 6th floor for a moment. The deck would have failed during the pour. Partial collapse, most likely on the south face. During active operation. He let that sit without decoration. Victoria received it without looking away. She was not a woman who protected herself from the weight of things by softening their edges, and she did not do that now. She stood with the full shape of what he had said, with what it meant for the 400 people who had been on this site at 7:14 this morning, and her expression carried the unguarded, unmanaged quality of someone who has set down every professional reflex for just long enough to actually feel something. Then she straightened. "I owe you something I don't know how to calculate," she said. "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "I'm going to disagree with you on that." "That's your right," he said. "But I didn't speak up this morning because of what you owe me. I spoke up because there were 400 people on this site." Victoria looked at him for a long time. The formal review began that afternoon. Rodriguez and his team spent 3 days on a comprehensive structural audit of the entire project, working from Marcus's original design documents, which Victoria had pulled from the archived commission files. The audit found 2 additional items requiring correction, both minor, both addressable before the opening, and found the remainder of the structure sound. Marcus participated in the technical sessions at Rodriguez's request. He sat at the conference table in the site trailer in the same canvas jacket he wore every day, with a cup of coffee from the same battered thermos, and he answered questions about load paths and connection details and the specific logic of decisions made 8 years ago with the matter-of-fact precision of someone for whom these things were not theoretical. Rodriguez was a careful man and a good engineer, and he was honest enough to say directly, on the second day, that the original structural design was among the most elegant he had reviewed in his career, and that the failure to flag the revision vulnerability was his firm's error and would be corrected. He said it looking at Marcus, not at Victoria, which was its own kind of statement. On the third evening, after the technical team had gone, Victoria came to find Marcus at the south wall, where he had resumed his morning habit of walking the perimeter. "The project opens in 8 days, she said. "I know. I want your name on it," she said. "The original design credit. It's been attributed to the successor firms. I want it corrected. in the opening materials, in the permanent record, wherever it appears. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because it's true," Victoria said. "And because the truth of a thing matters, regardless of whether anyone was watching when it was made." He did not answer immediately. He looked at the building, at the glass facade catching the last of the evening light, at the 6th floor that was now properly shored, at the 42 stories of a structure he had drawn in a different version of his life, in the years when Dana was still alive and Carter Structural was still the thing he had built it to be, and the future was a place he could see clearly. It was not that future anymore. He had built a different one, smaller and quieter, organized around a 7-year-old who drew buildings with windows like eyes and suns that were larger than everything. It was enough. He had learned in the hard, specific way that people learn such things that enough was not a consolation. It was the actual thing. "All right," he said. Victoria nodded once. The opening ceremony was on a Thursday evening. The building gleamed. There were speeches and photographs and the particular performative optimism of real estate events, and none of it was Marcus's particular environment or preference. He came because Lily asked him to. She had learned, in the way children learn things, not from a conversation, but from accumulation, from overhearing, from watching her father's face in the evenings, that the building being opened was connected to him in some way she didn't yet fully understand. She had asked, with the direct, unembarrassed curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to approach difficult questions sideways, whether Daddy's building was going to have his name on it. He had told her yes. She had worn her good shoes without being asked. They stood on the periphery of the crowd during the speeches, Lily in her good shoes with her hands in her coat pockets, watching the ceremony with the focused seriousness she brought to most things. She had not asked many questions about the building. She had studied it instead, its height, its glass, the way it caught the light, with the methodical attention of someone taking inventory. At the moment when Victoria, at the podium, said the words, "Originally designed by Marcus Carter of Carter Structural Group," Lily looked up at her father. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at him with an expression that was working something out. Then she said quietly, "Is that you?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's me." Lily looked back at the building. She studied it for another moment with the particular focused attention of someone updating a picture they had been carrying in their head. "It's really tall," she said finally. "It is," Marcus said. "Did you make it tall on purpose?" "Yes," he said, "on purpose." Lily nodded, as though this was the clarifying piece of information she had been waiting for. Then she reached up and took his hand, the casual, confident gesture of a child who knew where safety was and felt no need to explain it. And they stood there together on the edge of the crowd while the ceremony continued around them, and the building rose above them into the evening sky. In his jacket pocket, her drawing was still folded exactly as it had been. He had not taken it out. He did not need to. Victoria found him afterward, near the edge of the plaza where the crowd had thinned. She looked at Lily first, the good shoes, the serious expression, the hand still loosely in her father's, and something in her face moved in the unguarded way it had moved that morning at the south wall. "She looks like someone who takes things seriously," Victoria said. "She does," Marcus said. Victoria crouched down to Lily's level with the slight awkwardness of a woman who spent most of her professional life at a height that required people to look up at her, and she said, "Your father built something that's going to be here for a very long time. I wanted to make sure you knew that." Lily considered this with appropriate weight. Then she said, "He already told me." Victoria looked up at Marcus, and for a moment something passed across her face that was not quite amusement and not quite admiration, but lived in the territory adjacent to both. She stood. She extended her hand to Marcus, and he shook it with the same gravity with which he had done everything else, simply, without performance, as though this were just one more true thing happening in a sequence of true things. "If you're ever interested in returning to practice," Victoria said, "I have 3 projects in design phase." Marcus looked at the building for a moment. He thought about the site trailer and the technical sessions and the specific satisfaction of explaining a load path to someone who was actually listening. "I'll think about it," he said. It was not a yes, but it was not the answer he would have given 6 weeks ago, and they both understood the difference. 6 months later, Carter Structural Group reopened as a 2-person practice. Marcus and a young engineer named Danny, whom he had met at one of the technical sessions and who had asked questions with the specific quality of someone who was actually interested in the answers. The office was small, 1 room above a hardware store, with 2 desks and a drafting table and a framed drawing on the wall beside the door, a building with windows like eyes and an enormous sun. Daddy's work written at the bottom in careful, crooked letters. The first commission was from Callaway Development. The second came 6 weeks after that, from a structural firm that had heard about the Callaway Tower review through Rodriguez, who had said in a professional context that the analysis work was some of the most rigorous he had encountered in 30 years of practice. He had said it without elaboration and without drama, the way professionals acknowledge things that did not require decoration. Marcus was not in the room when Rodriguez said it. He was at Lily's school that afternoon for a presentation she was making about buildings, what made them stand up, why some of them lasted and others didn't. She had prepared for it with the focused, total commitment she brought to everything, and she had asked Marcus questions for 2 weeks about foundations and load paths and what made something strong enough to stay. He had answered every one of them. On the morning her presentation was scheduled, he checked the drawing in his jacket pocket, the way he always did, and then he drove her to school and walked her to the door and watched her go inside with her materials under her arm and her shoulders squared in the posture of someone who had prepared for something and was ready to do it. Then he drove to the office above the hardware store and sat down at his desk and started work. Outside the window, the city did what cities do. Buildings rose and others came down, and new ones were drawn on paper by people trying to imagine what they would become in the world. Most of them would stand for a long time, longer than the people who made them, which was the ordinary, specific miracle of the work, that you could put something true into the world, and it would stay. Marcus understood this. He had always understood it. He had just needed, for a while, to find his way back to it. The person nobody notices is sometimes the one holding everything up. The question is whether we're paying enough attention to find out. If this kind of story stays with you, subscribe. There are more people like Marcus out there, and their stories deserve to be heard.